This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Most of you aren't just listening right now, you're driving, cleaning, and even exercising. But what if you could be saving money by switching to Progressive? Drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Multitask right now. Quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and he, Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. It's Questions Day, Kieran. We can't have a third week where news, gossip, nostalgia about 1970s TV shows and the contraceptive qualities of Dennis the Menace get in the way of our lovely listeners and their questions. In fact, we're even recording this earlier than normal in case a big story breaks. And I don't know any other pod, Kieran, which thinks missing a big story is the way forward. So if Lionel Messi has bought Derby County since Friday, we'll get to it on our next show because we have to do questions, Kieran. Got me?
Okay, I've got a couple of stories which I've spent about 4 hours researching this morning, but we'll knock them back to Thursday. So Rochdale fans, Newcastle fans, we know that there's some stories about your clubs, but we do a lot of questions we've also researched.
What's happened at Rochdale, Kieran?
Well, Matt Southall, who was the owner for a very short period of time at Charlton, where the club's expenditure on Range Rovers and swanky apartment rentals went through the roof, now appears to be in a position where he's trying to buy 25% of Rochdale. And I think it's fair to say Rochdale fans aren't happy and Charlton fans are giving him the nod. So yeah, we'll look at that in more depth. Well,
now hang on a second, Kieran, because we discussed Rochdale a lot recently. This 25% shares, because you were discussing how many shares were left to buy. So who has he bought these shares off? Are these the missing shares from fans that he's bought? Or?
No. This is from the guys who bought 40% and were trying to take over Rochdale. And I think we discussed this with the guy from Rochdale Trust at the time. What exactly are they going to do with them? Are they going to sell them back to fans? Well, if they're selling 25% to Matt Southall, it's frying pan to fire situation. So we'll try and get a bit more information on this as well.
Well, from what we know about him, Kieran, what we learned about him back in the day, early in the pod when Charlton was a big story, he won't have bought 25% of the shares for the fun of it. So clearly he's looking to buy the club, isn't he?
He's up to something, and the something doesn't involve good news for Rochdale. That's all I can say.
Okay. Well, I'm heading for the northeast this weekend, Kieran. So in case anybody in that area hears my voice and goes, "Oh, he's the Price of Football bloke," let's ask him.
Yes.
To save me doing what I normally do, and say, just email Kieran. I don't know. I forget from week to week. I just read the stuff out. What's happened at Newcastle now?
Well, there was a legal case which went through on Wednesday and Thursday. There were some quite interesting revelations, accusations that the Premier League threatened to kick Newcastle out of the Premier League. Didn't go down particularly well, but we'll take a look in. So we'll look at it on a more granular basis on Thursday.
Okay. Sorry, Ken. You want me to pour sugar on my script? Is that what? I'm not entirely sure what looking at something I'm not sure I've ever had occasion in my life to look at something on a granular basis. Okay, I shall look forward to it. Not as much as I look forward to a weekend in Tynemouth.
Absolutely.
Questions, Kieran. We do have a lot, and the first two are from people that have been very patiently waiting because we possibly made the mistake of telling them that we weren't reading their questions out last week. But Paul Cullen, your patience is rewarded. Paul's question is about Everton. It says, Everton Football Club have recently been given the nod to build their new stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock on the banks of the lovely River Mersey. And the owner, Farhad Moshiri, has indicated he will contribute roughly £100 million towards building costs, but how will he raise the remainder, which has been estimated at £400 million? What sort of guarantee will be needed to secure loans, and how and for how long will repayments be structured?
Right. Looking at this, clearly Farhad Moshiri has been a very benevolent owner of Everton Football Club to date. And also his former business partner, Alisha Usmanov, has contributed significantly towards the naming rights.
Yeah.
And is shirt sponsoring one of his companies of the Everton women's team. So Mr. Usmanov might chip in as well. But in terms of the sort of the third party funding, this is going to come from two sources, I understand it. First of all, the local council. Now, this is perhaps a little bit more twitchy because I work in the magnificent city of Liverpool, and it's a city which is split. So the mayor is quite famously an Everton fan, and the council have said that they would be willing to lend, perhaps up to £30 million to Everton, and they'll point out that other councils have lent to clubs, Manchester City, Spurs, West Ham, and so on. They also believe that they can that the new stadium will qualify for a grant of about £15 million because it will be part of a regeneration project at Bramley-Moore Dock. And they've done an economic impact report. I'm always a bit sceptical about these things, but they do look very positive. The main source of funding, however, will come from what is known as a private placement. And that's where Everton will effectively give some IOUs to some banks. And this is sort of the approach that was taken by Spurs. And Spurs have ended up with, I think it was £657 million worth of debt. So expect to see some investment banks become involved with this because of the large sums involved. And in terms of how's it going to fund? Well, Spurs don't have to repay their loan for at least another 15 years. And during that period, it's the equivalent of an interest-only mortgage. So what will happen if all parties are happy is that when we get to the repayment date, the bank will say, well, you've not got the £400 or £500 million in the bank. We're quite happy to roll over the loan. So if the bank's happy with the interest rates that they get and Everton are happy, then you could see this as being a sort of a fairly long-term funding issue. And the way that it will pay for itself is that the additional money that Everton generate from matchday income, from events taking place at Bramley-Moore Dock, that will more than cover the interest bill. Presently, Everton, they only make about £15 million a season from Goodison in terms of matchday. Now, that compares to Spurs making around about 120 million. You see, there's a huge gap. So I think the rationale behind this is that, yes, we'll have to pay interest, but the extra money coming in, mainly from hospitality, from events, and clearly season ticket sales will contribute as well. But Everton it's known as the People's Club for a reason. It's very much rooted in the local community. I don't think that Everton will be able to increase season ticket prices in the same way that Spurs have done since moving to their new stadium.
It's strange, isn't it? Spurs borrow the money to get their new stadium, make an extra £120 million a year, and yet still aren't expected to pay that loan back. That's magic, isn't it? That's big business. The council interest one is interesting, Kieran. Apologies for using that word twice in the same sentence, because as we know just from recent events, local politics on Merseyside can be volatile. can't they? So council involvement, you'd kind of probably want that to be minimal, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, politics on Merseyside is never dull. Just Google Joe Anderson for that, folks, and he's a character. We'll say no more than that.
Right. Okay.
And
we'll move on, Kieran, because we know what that means. When you're in a pub you don't know and somebody walks in and you go, "Oh, he looks interesting." And somebody says, "Oh, yeah, he's a real character." You go, "Right, I'll go to another pub."
Yes.
So he seems to have 10 other real characters with him, none of whom seem to be particularly happy that I'm in their pub in a red and blue scarf. Conor McGuigan has also been on hold for 3 shows. I hope producer guy wasn't playing him that jazz music while he waited for his question to be answered. Connor says that his club, QPR, as well as Nottingham Forest, were sponsored by Football Index, who, as we all know, went out of business earlier this year. Will this mean some of the sponsorship money went unpaid, or was it all paid up front?
Sponsors normally pay at the start of the season because they're quite keen to help to prime the pumps in terms of the transfer market and also helping the clubs to fund things over the course of the summer when they've got no match day sales. So that's one of the things which is normally negotiated by clubs. Can't guarantee that, of course. In which case, there's no bad debt to worry about. But since the last time we've spoken about Football Index, there has been a government report, and again, if people, I know some of our listeners are as enthusiastic for these things as I've read the full report, which has been published on HMG's website, and I think it's fair to say that the government was not very impressed. The Gambling Commission appeared to have a lack of understanding of the nature of the business of Football Index. Was it gambling? Was it investing? And this very, very weird claim that there's a difference between the word stock market and the words stock and market next to each other. That was one of the defences used. There's actually been a report in The Guardian today, and we're recording this on Saturday, the 2nd of October, which had some emails where effectively said that the people were in communication with those in charge of Football Index, saying it wasn't a sustainable model and warning them at a very early stage whether those emails were disagreed with, disregarded, or just binned. We're not sure, but it's not reflecting particularly well on some of the alternative investment methods which are currently available to people. If the word investment is appropriate, which I don't think it is.
It's only 9:10, Kieran. How have you had time to read the paper already?
Well, when you got Finley at about 6 o'clock, come and nudges me with a slipper every morning. So I sort of get up and I have a very strict routine. It's 6 o'clock. I have to read The Athletic, The Times, The Financial Times, The Telegraph, and The Guardian, and then I'll take him for his walk.
Okay, for new listeners, Finley is a dog, by the way. Just I don't know why he wakes. I don't know why he wakes you up with a slipper. Has he got an old-fashioned fetish? Yeah, okay, no, let's not get into.
Well, I'm a Brighton boy. I'll say no more than
that. Cameron Thompson asks an interesting question, which, to be perfectly honest, borders on a rant.
I was thinking rant as well. I read it. Yes.
Talking of interesting characters in pubs. Why do fans, media, etc., continue to be hoodwinked by corporations that masquerade as clubs? My golf club is a club. It relies on members' subscriptions. My running club is a club. Crikey, Cameron's busy. These corporations don't deserve block capitals to be afforded the privilege of being called a club. It won't solve the problems of our beautiful game, but let's call a spade a spade. I like Cameron, but
don't spill his pint.
No, I suspect his mates have heard him say that a lot, and I imagine when Cameron turns up in the golf club bar, there's a murmur goes around. Oh Christ, it's not a club, Cameron. He's got a point, though. I mean, historically, we forget the word club in football club, don't we? And he's absolutely right. They're not clubs in any way, shape, or form that we would recognise as clubs anymore, are they?
That's correct. And if you go to Companies House and look at the records, you will see that there are some interesting names. So we've just been mentioning Everton. I think Everton's official name is the Everton Football Club Company. So so when they are set up, they were set up as limited liability companies, and the advantage of being a limited liability company is that if the company goes bust, then the owners are only responsible for the debts to the extent of the money that they put in. So that's why, if we take a look at Derby County Football Club Limited, Company Limited, it's got substantial debts, as we know, but Mel Morris doesn't have to go and personally pay off those debts because he's got the protection of limited liability status. I can understand I can understand where Cameron's coming from. What we do see these days, however, is a recent creation, something called a community interest company, which is a social enterprise which is set up for community benefit. And certainly some of the fan-owned clubs are taking advantage of this CIC status. And they can still pay dividends. They can still aim to break even or make a profit, but they sort of straddle the old school companies there purely to make money ethos of some entities and people who take the view that a football club is a much broader sphere than that. But then existing owners will often say, I've put a load of money into the club. I'm quite happy with the old status as well.
Yeah, and I'm quite happy to remind people that FC stands for Football Club, not Football Corporation. And of course, back in the day, they were simply that, weren't they? Back in in Victorian times, it was a group of like-minded Victorian chaps with big shoulders and big moustaches just getting together to kick a ball about and bemoan the fact that the war wasn't going particularly well. And that's simply that, wasn't it? It would have been like a Sunday football team, just subscriptions, and then somehow 92 of them evolved into professional football clubs out of the many, many hundreds. And people don't realise how many football clubs this country has tried to sustain. They became businesses. But Cameron's absolutely right. Initially, they were just clubs. They were just fun. And that's gone out of the game, isn't it? Partly because of us, basically. We've sucked a lot of the fun out of football. James Wilson refers to something that you've said frequently, Kieran, which is that host nations for World Cups tend to lose a lot of money. But, says James, FIFA seems to make a lot of money after a World Cup. So how does that work? and could a World Cup
just answered his own question
and could a World Cup be made sustainable should FIFA decide that that's what they want to do?
Yes, well, the reason why a host nation normally loses money is that let's just think about the logistics of this. You've got to have a minimum of 8 stadia which satisfy FIFA's regulations. So in terms of lighting, TV facilities, access, infrastructure, all of that. So that's very expensive to set up. You have to look at the ability to take on all of the football tourists that are going to arrive for the World Cup, and the World Cup lasts for 4 weeks. Yeah. So the stadium's going to take 2 to 3 years to build. The new airports, the new hotels that are built, they will take, and then what's going to happen to them afterwards? So if we take a look at what has happened in Brazil, I went to the South Africa World Cup, and it was a fantastic experience. And it was put on for my benefit by the host nation. And the hope is that you're going to go back from the World Cup and say to people, "Oh, South Africa's all right. Why don't you go there on holiday?" And you go back to your mates and say, "Yes, South Africa was great. Absolutely wonderful time. Would you go back there?" I said, "Well, I've just been there, so I wouldn't go back." And you realise that the glossy brochures put together by the management consultants who are pitching on behalf of politicians the numbers there, to me, it's pure fiction. I could drive a coach and horses through their projections very easily. So they always pitch to FIFA, and they always try to pitch to the local population is that yes, it's going to involve money to set this up. But there will be legacy benefits, and the legacy benefits is that you've got a football stadium or a stadium which is now effectively mothballed. It's got maintenance costs to incur afterwards, and nobody's using it. So FIFA make money because they insist, as one of their rules, is that the host country gives FIFA and all of the players charitable status during the course of the competition, which means that FIFA pay no taxes. So that's less money coming in for the host nation. So unless you have deep pockets, or unless you've got a politician in charge who is effectively he's pitching this as part of an election campaign. Vote for me and I'll bring you the World Cup. Everybody wants, people want to see the World Cup, and it's we can remember the Olympics. And it was a fantastic 4 weeks, but there's huge legacy costs afterwards. So the only way it could be done on a sustainable basis, to get back to James's second half of the question, is either to have it hosted by a country which has existing large stadia, but FIFA wants to expand. It wants to get the World Cup around the world, so that's fine if you are here in England, Germany, many of the European countries, even the US. That would work, but that's not part of FIFA's remit. Or B, to end up with something similar to what we experienced with the European Championships, and to have it taking place in more than one nation. Now, the 2026 World Cup is taking place in Mexico. Mexico, the USA, and Canada. And we were discussing before the show how we quite enjoy train journeys. Well, if you're going from the south of Mexico to Canada, that's you must be a major league train spotter to enjoy that.
Let's not pull up that thread of what we discussed before we record, Kieran, because frankly, train journeys is one of the only ones we can actually broadcast out loud. That makes it sound really dull. They talk about train journeys before they do the podcast, those two old blokes. And of course, as we've discussed on the pod, Kieran, as you mentioned, for a country like South Africa, where the existing infrastructure isn't as firm as, say, a country like Germany, it costs them a huge amount of money the country hasn't really got. And then, of course, even if they were to make money, none of that is trickling down to the vast majority of the population, most of whom couldn't afford the ticket prices to watch the games in their country anyway. And then in Qatar, you've got the opposite problem. They can all afford to watch the games, but have no interest in football. So it's a strange process, this lottery stroke bribery competition that brings a World Cup to a particular country, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've said on more than one occasion, FIFA is a mafiosa organisation, and it runs on that basis. And I know producer Guy will be listening. I can say that because you've only got to look at the number of FIFA officials who have now been barred from the sport, or are on the wanted list of the FBI, and who are not travelling to the USA.
Yeah. John Burke says, although Burnley are not my club, I'm intrigued by Kieran's high regard for how well it's been managed in the past. And that's the second question running, Kieran. People have obviously been listening to what you say. That's nice. Yes. How much did the new owners pay for Burnley, and who receives the money? Was it shareholders? And if so, did they make a handsome profit? I ask because I always got the sense this was one place where the club came before the owner, or as Cameron would say, the corporation comes before the owner.
Well, in terms of the sale of Burnley, it was sold, I think, it's around about £170 million. And that was for 84% of the shares. And those sales were from the existing shareholders who have made all of the money. So they have benefited significantly from their tenure as the guardians of Burnley Football Club. And And one of the reasons why I said I felt that we're really well run was the fact that they never put any money into the club. They ran it in such a way so that it was sustainable. It did have a break-even model.
Kieran, who were those shareholders? Was there one major shareholder that sold out?
There was about 3 or 4. I think one guy was called Mike Garlick, Phil Garlick. There were a couple of others. So it's mainly, I think it was mainly sort of 3 major shareholders.
Right.
And they worked very well in terms of their strategy. I'm a huge Sean Dyche fan. I think he's done an amazing job. He knows exactly what he wants from his players in terms of recruitment, drilling, and so on. So that's why they always managed to break even, and they became attractive to investors. What the investors have acquired, and I think this sort of to link to John's question. Yes, they've got the property assets. When the new owners came in, Burnley had around about £42 million in the bank account. So that money was then effectively used as part of the £170 million which went to the previous owners. And on top of that, ALK, who are the company which is now running Burnley, they've borrowed about 60 million. So the new owners haven't put all of that 170 million into the club themselves. They've used the club's existing cash, and they've borrowed on top of it. And yes, they've topped that up to make the final payments.
Now, Kieran, this is going to seem a really silly question, but that's what I'm here for. We know that. Say, if the new owners of Burnley had approached the previous owners and given them 170 million quid cash, just bought it outright with their own money,
yep,
would that 42 million pound that was in the bank then become their 42 million pound?
In effect, yes, because if you are a majority shareholder, then you have access to the assets of the company that you've just acquired.
Right. Okay.
So yes. So it's not a silly question. As I tell my students every week, the only silly questions are the ones that we never ask.
Yeah, but Kieran, I hate to break this to you, but 90% of your students can crack that code. Essentially, because I just realised you say to me that's not a silly question. I know I can picture your face as you say that, Kieran. It's not an angry face; it's more a disappointed one that I felt I had to ask that question. Your students will go home thinking, "Oh, I asked a silly question." And Sir was nice. Do they call you Sir, by the way? It's just occurred to me.
It varies. Some call me Sir, which I hate, so I knock that on the head straight away. Most call me Kieran. And occasionally, I'm called Professor, and as a result of recent events, even more occasionally, I'm called the Baron. Normally from local students. Hey, Baron! Hey, Baron! Hey.
That's very funny. I always had you down as one of those trendy supply teachers from the 70s who comes in and says, "Hey guys, you can call me Kieran. None of that old-fashioned patriarchal sir stuff. You can call me Ms. Maguire if you want." Another question. Another question from another John. John Vince. Hello, John, friend of the show. John has a question about a subject that I think is probably discussed more by our listeners, certainly the ones I bump into, than any other at the moment, and that's gambling and football's relationship with it. And John says, with the obscene amount that the Bet365 boss earned, as discussed by us just last week, an eye-wateringly obscene amount, how much has the betting industry given to help problem gamblers over the pandemic period? Should betting adverts have been reduced during that time when millions were stuck at home looking for a distraction and instead may well have ended up chasing losses they can't afford? And it was what I'd say an obscene amount, Kieran, but she's earned that money. It's
421 mil plus about 65 million on top in dividends.
So £500 million.
Yeah,
it is an obscene amount, isn't it? Really, but she has earned it. To be fair,
yeah.
So John's question is a valid one, and as I say, Kieran, this is something that our listeners really, really want to discuss, and I don't think it's just our listener. I think increasingly gambling in football is something that people are becoming more and more concerned about.
Yeah. Okay. Let's be honest. There's two types of problem gamblers. First of all, as far as the gambling industry is concerned, first of all, there's the professional gamblers who win.
Yeah.
And the gambling companies are actually very, very good at dealing with these problems because what they do is they close down their accounts.
Yeah.
And people say that's not true. I'm going to try to get a professional gambler to come on the show. We're not going to. It's not encouraging people to gamble because it's just being honest with the processes and the challenges faced by people who do that. So I've been in contact with one person. I think he's willing to come on the show. But the other type of problem gambler is it's a problem for the individual.
Yeah.
What is the industry doing? Well, the industry does provide funding for the likes of GamCare, which provides support for people who have got some form of addiction to gambling. The industry will point out that it's made the following measures. You now have the option to have timeouts, deposit limits, holidays from gambling, and so on. And you will see. I think now, it's about 1 in 3 probably adverts that you see from the gambling company saying, "Look, we're the good guys here. We are trying to help you." But there's some things that make me feel uncomfortable. I was asked to talk to an all-party parliamentary group on the issue of the relationship between football and gambling. So, as you know, I like numbers, and the reason why I don't gamble is because I like numbers. But as part of my presentation, I worked out how much money the gambling companies are making, and they operate on around about a 5% return. That's their margins, and then you can work out, you can extrapolate from that just how much money is being spent in terms of total wages. And that's twice the NHS budget. So this country has a gambling issue. And could the gambling industry do more? Well, as part of sort of the research into that, I don't gamble, but I opened up an account with a bookmaker, put on one bet just to see what happened. And what intrigued me was I was then bombarded by emails, but these emails were personalised. The email wasn't from Paddy Power or William Hill. I can't remember the name of the gambling company. It was Steve or Angela at William Hill. Hey, Kieran, you've been a bit quiet for the past few days. Tell you what, we've missed you. Now, I can deal with that because I'm not interested in gambling. But if you are a vulnerable individual and you're desperately trying to stop yourself from getting sucked in, you're feeling down, you might have a little bit of money, or you've got access to somebody else's cash, and you say, right, I'll just put on the one. And then we get back into that routine. And looking at the report from GamCare, they said that 86%, I think, of problem gamblers said it's all to do with online because it is so easy to place a bet online. And the other big issue is that we come at this from the perspective of football gambling. Actually, football gambling itself isn't the biggest issue. It's the fact that it's a gateway to online slots.
Yeah. Because
what will happen is you put a bet on the football, and the thing is, football matches are only taking place during in the evenings midweek and over the weekend. Well, the gambling companies say, well, why can't we be taking on these punters for the rest of the day? And the big advantage from their point of view in terms of online slots is, of course, the odds are fixed so much in favour of the betting company. If you are a professional gambler, you can actually make money, through having a very good strategy in terms of football, or it could be F1, or it could be there are successful gamblers. There are some professional gamblers who claim that they win and they don't win. I'm not encouraging anybody to take this up. It's a very high risk career to take. But once you get the Kieran, we've not heard from you. Tell you what, is a free £5 bet, and we'll give you 20 free slots, and you get into these things. And the way that these online slots are organised is that they trigger adrenaline. In the way that the colour schemes, the lighting schemes, in the same way that slot machines do in arcades. And we're old enough. I'm old enough to remember going into the arcades at Brighton when I was 14 and 15, and losing my pocket money and my paper round money and having to walk home. And I learnt my lessons there, but.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to me talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
For some people, it can become very addictive, and that's what they're trying to do. It's a gateway drug, football gambling, to where it's all stacked in favour of the house.
There's a couple of issues there, Kieran. Professional gamblers have got it sorted because many professional gamblers will maybe only have 7-8 bets a year.
Yeah,
but there'll be huge bets, and they'll be the result of a lot of research and a lot of talking to people, and they only need one of them to come off, and they don't have to gamble again for another month. At the other end, I put a tenner on. I've limited myself to a tenner a week, and I'm very good at only doing that. And some weeks I won't have a bet at all. But it drives me up the wall because you walk in the betting shop, and there's all these signs everywhere saying, "Take a rest. Have you thought about having a break? Set yourself a limit." If Ash, the lovely man who runs my off license, was to say to me, "Have you thought about taking a break?" I would say, "Yeah, I have," and then just go to another off license. You're telling an addict to take a break. It doesn't work like that. And of course, you mentioned football gambling, but the other huge problem is footballers gambling.
Yes,
I spoke to an ex-professional recently, who I can't name for obvious reasons, and he said he can almost guarantee that at every single one of the 92 clubs in English football and in Scottish football and probably across the world, there will be at least 2 players that are off their game because they're stressed to the eyeballs about gambling debts.
Yep.
Because a lot of them, certainly at the higher end, a lot of them are given access to free credit lines, etc. So it's a huge problem for football. And as we've discussed week in, week out, football itself isn't making any of the money out of the gambling. There's not even a levy on. It's just something needs to be done. And I'm actually encouraged by the fact that in the past 6 months, it has become a subject that many football fans are becoming aware of, and they're noticing things like the fact that kids' shirts can't have the gambling sponsor on. So like when Palace were sponsored by ManBetX, which was a bizarre gambling porn site, you're not allowed to sponsor the kids' shirts, and fans notice this sort of thing and start to ask why. And also, fans increasingly don't want to walk about. I know a Stoke fan who he just won't buy the shirt because he doesn't want to advertise a gambling company. So this is an issue it's still not being taken seriously enough, but I get the sense that it will be. And let's move on to another question, which in its own way, Kieran, is as contentious. It's it's a question from Rob Matthews, and dear God, we're going to get tweets after this.
Yes.
Actually, I wish I knew Rob Matthews' Twitter handle. He could get the tweets. Rob Matthews says, would there be any benefit to Mike Ashley in allowing Newcastle to get relegated? Would this allow a takeover to go through with less scrutiny from the EFL? And would the Saudis still want to buy a championship club? Can you imagine, Kieran? Can you imagine Newcastle being relegated and Mike Ashley saying, calm down, Geordies, calm down. I wanted that to happen. It's all a part of the plan. Can you imagine it? But it's the way Newcastle are playing currently, Kieran. You wouldn't bet on them being in another relegation struggle, and it's an interesting question from Rob, clearly, because at the moment, Mike Ashley clearly has no intention of putting the investment in to make Newcastle even a top 10 team, let alone a European team.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Mike Ashley he's normally very good at gauging what is the minimum amount he can get away with. Right. They signed Joe Willock this summer. And I think that was the only addition.
Yeah.
And I remember I dug out the numbers in terms of the infrastructure spend of every Premier League club over the last decade. And Newcastle's spend was not just the lowest in the Premier League; it was vastly lower. It was probably about 20% of the next lowest. So it was some amazing amazing lack of investment from Mike Ashley into he expects people just to turn up and pay the money over. Going back to Rob's question, would Newcastle be subject to less scrutiny by the EFL? I think there would be potentially for two reasons. First of all, the EFL has less resources. The Premier League is extremely well funded, and they can afford to invest a lot of money through accountants and lawyers, and so going into the small print of everything to do with the potential owner. The EFL has problems in two ways. First of all, they're having to look after 72 clubs instead of 20. And secondly, every pound that they spend on legal and accounting and investigation costs is £1 less to distribute to the members, and the members are desperate for money. So I think they've actually got a tougher gig. I think the second issue is that, and we will try to cover this in a bit more depth in the next show, is that there are clubs in the Premier League who do not want any further competition. Yeah. 6 into 4 doesn't go unless you watch certain websites. But 7 into 4 is more difficult. So if Newcastle became the next Chelsea or Manchester City in terms of having a ultra high net worth owner who can afford to fund the club, then that competition for Champions League places, and we know that especially from the perspective of the American owners, that's what they want. That's why they wanted Super League. They wanted the benefits of the Champions League without having to win matches to qualify for it. So there's going to be 2 clubs missing out this season. I think we know they're probably going to be Arsenal and Spurs. It has the Big Six is in. There's a potential of that becoming a Big Four again. Yeah. But what the last thing that these clubs want is another club to potentially break into the cozy cartel that they already have. So you can see the benefits of that. Would Mike Ashley want that? Well, the Saudi owners might say, well, we are still willing to buy Newcastle United, but are we willing to pay £300 million for a championship club? We could, when we could buy, Sunderland went for about 25 million. And they're not that far away. Appreciate they're not in the championship at present, but fair chance they will be next season. Derby were going. The asking price for them, I've seen some documentation. Mel Morris was looking for 50 to 60 million. Would you pay 5 or 6 times that amount to buy Newcastle in the championship when you've got, again, a year without the benefits of being in the Premier League? So I think it's a double-edged sword from Ashley's perspective. Would the club be easier to sell? Yes. Would he still be able to command £300 million plus? I don't think he would.
I know we'll talk about this in more detail on Thursday, Kieran, but there are 2 things. I mean, Man City, Man United, Liverpool can dislike the idea of Newcastle being taken over as much as they want. There's nothing they can do to stop it. It's a private company. Mike Ashley can sell it to who he wants. And also, what's to scrutinise here? We're talking about Saudi Arabia buying the club. They're able to afford it, and they're not going to be turned down by the Premier League as unfit and proper persons. So it confuses me slightly.
The issue here is Saudi Arabia has a testy relationship with Qatar. I think I've pronounced this right this time. And therefore, on the back of that, you now cannot use Be-in to watch the Premier League in Saudi. So the accusations which are being made is that the Saudi government is encouraging piracy of Premier League TV rights. And this has given the owners of those clubs who have been lobbying the Premier League to prevaricate in terms of the potential Saudi takeover to say, well, how can you possibly allow somebody in who encourages piracy of TV? And they're harumphing and trying to say that we're doing this from an ethical and moral perspective. They're not. They're looking after number one.
Yeah, of course. Debashis Sikdar is a friend of the show, and Debashis says that while recently discussing a proposal to install a $1 million machine at our factory, my boss and I were asked to submit a thorough business plan, including a breakdown of expected ROI and expected payback period in order to get management approval. I was wondering whether football clubs have to do similar when spending millions on players. And then Debashis gives us the pleasing image of, did Man United have to do a PowerPoint presentation to the Glazers before getting the £80 million for Harry Maguire, which I just love that image of the Glazers going, yeah, he seems like a good player. You got any pictures of this guy smiling? He's not a happy guy. His head is that size. It's not perspective. It's a fair. Actually, again, one of the reasons why I love doing this pod, as we've always said, is that our listeners come up with angles that you hadn't thought of. You're asking the owners to cough up 40 million, 80 million, 120 million pound for a player, and expecting them to take your word for it that they're worth the money.
Yeah. In terms of Debashish's question, we are increasingly seeing clubs making investment decisions in talent with some view to getting a financial return. So that's why if I went through all of the transfers, I think it was in the summer of 2020 or 2019, I was doing a talk for somebody, and I said, every single player who has been signed for a fee of more than £20 million is 25 or younger. So what clubs are doing is that when they are signing players, first of all, they're putting them on long contracts to protect the investment. And secondly, they say, well, if he half comes off, we'll be able to get that money back in 3 years, and we can sell him at the age of 28. So there are more nerds involved in the investment decisions, and some clubs are coming at this from more of a spreadsheet angle than before. Now, that causes issues when you have got what's best described as old school managers who say, I know him, he's a good lad, yes, he's 29, but I still think we should go and buy them. And then you've got the data analysts and you've got the finance people saying, well, we offer him a 4-year contract. He's 33, 34. He's a professional athlete, but there's not many people who, even within professional football, who maintain their body to the same degree as Cristiano Ronaldo, who is 36. And let's face it, at every single opportunity to rip off his shirt, he takes it, and you go, okay, he's done a few push-ups, hasn't he? Yeah. Perhaps I'll take Finley for a slightly longer walk today and try to get into shape like that.
Well, see, that's the thing, Kieran. He hasn't got a dog. He's got time on his hands, hasn't he? He hasn't got to cram in 2 or 3 podcasts a week and going down for wonky chomps. Yes. He's got somebody to get his wonky chomps for him. Now, our next question comes from Jonathan Davis, and Billy Lead asked the same question, said producer guy. What are the chances Also, that might be Billy from Leeds. As
Yes, I thought that as well.
something seemed to have gone wrong with the email. I think producer guy's cat may have walked over the keyboard at that stage, and as we know, solid gold cats have got heavy paws. Jonathan Davis and Billy Lead ask, again, a pertinent question, and one that hadn't occurred to me. What are the costs involved for those Champions League fixtures being played at a neutral ground? Who pays the club that owns the ground? Is it UEFA or the club that should be the home team?
In respect of what we had in COVID, and clearly many matches did take place at neutral venues, UEFA will have negotiated a hosting fee with the club that was COVID neutral from an access perspective, and that would have then come out of the big pot of money which UEFA used to split between all of the clubs that participate in competitions. So as the circumstances in which we found ourselves earlier this year were fairly unique, it's a cost which is borne by UEFA, but ultimately picked up by all of the clubs who participate in the competitions because there's less money to go around between them.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Eric Eels. And in brackets, it says pronounced Eels. Now, I don't know if that's come from Eric Eels himself or from producer Guy. I know I struggle with names, but it's spelled Eales. I think I would have gone straight for Eels.
Yes,
frankly.
a great band, by the way, Eels. Big fan
Eels,
of Eels.
Eels are a great band, yeah. But Eric Eels wasn't the lead singer of Eels.
No.
I think we can establish that. It'd be less. Was that Finley shaking?
Yes.
Wow, how wet is that dog? Or is eels another of his trigger words? Ooh, eels. This is a question I sometimes wonder why new listeners stay for the next pod, Kieran, really. Unless you've kept up with this pod from the start and you understand fully the references that are being thrown about willy-nilly. When we first started this pod, Kieran, almost 2 years ago, I expected that this chap, the subject to this question, would be somebody we would be talking about on a regular basis, because certainly he had a reputation as being difficult, volatile, shall we say. That's the second time I've used the word volatile on this pod. So Eric says that he read recently that Paul Scally, owner of Gillingham, will only pay agents if he absolutely has to, because the agent represents the player, so the player should pay. That seems to make sense to everybody, says Eric. Does this mean, though, that in some cases the fee paid for a player is one amount and the cost to the buying club is that amount plus the agent's fee? Surely that's how it works in other areas. If a comedy club books Kevin, do they pay him and an additional fee to his agent, or does he pay the agent? It depends if it's a cash gig or not, to be perfectly honest, Eric. For writing work, no, I get a fee negotiated by the agent. She takes 10%, and that's... Eric assumed that's how transfers work. Most of us do, Kieran. And Palace famously lost out on buying Tim Cahill because Simon Jordan wouldn't pay the agent fee, and Tim Cahill said he wasn't going to pay it.
Yes, yeah, it's complicated, and I've been in touch with our friend Jonathan with regards to this, and he sent me I think I've got 12 texts from him. And he has gone into significant detail here, which I'm very grateful for, Jonathan, as always. What's happening here is the club paying the agent for doing something. So, if the club has approached an agent to say, we're looking for a left back, then the agent is perfectly entitled to pay the agent because he's provided them with a service. Alternatively, are we paying the agent on behalf of the player? So things can get messy, and you have what's sometimes known as duality, where the agent could be acting on behalf of the buying club, but also in terms of finding the player, but then the player himself for trying to negotiate a package. The agent will normally be paid on a percentage of the whole life deal. So if the agent negotiates a pay package of X percent, of X £1,000 per week, then the agent's entitled to a share of that throughout the life of the contract. Sometimes the selling club will ask an agent to find a home for a player. And sometimes that person, that agent, can operate on behalf of all three parties. So I think the classic case here is Raiola in respect of Paul Pogba. Juventus wanted to sell the player, Manchester United wanted to buy the player, and the player wanted to move. And the agent managed to extract money from all of them. I think he made about €26 million from Juventus. Manchester United paid him a finder's fee for helping to persuade the player who wanted to go to Manchester United and now he will be taking a percentage of Paul Pogba's wages and renegotiating contracts and so on. So it's messy, but how much money Manchester United paid and how much money Juventus received, it was a mind-boggling number. We are talking tens of millions.
So, I'm slightly surprised by that answer, Kieran, because from what you're saying, it sounds like the traditional model has disappeared completely. Because I'm with Eric. Basically, I assumed that most transfers went along the normal lines. Is that my agent approaches me, I'm happily playing for Bolton, and my agent comes along and says, Blackburn are interested. I've managed to add another £1 million to the asking price. I've negotiated the deal. I'll take my 15% and I'll see you at Christmas for the party. But that's not the case anymore. Are any transfers conducted like that at all?
I imagine that some could be. I think at the upper echelons of football, it becomes more complicated. I think if you are playing in the lower couple of leagues, then the chances are, I saw a report in one of the newspapers today saying that below the Premier League, transfer fees are going to become, they become rare in the Championship and practically non-existent in Leagues 1 and 2 in a post-COVID environment. So under those circumstances, it would be a case of the players coming to the end of a contract and his agents having to work hard to find him a club. And that will be the case because the player will be moving on and there'll be no fee taking place. So the club won't be willing to pay a finder's fee because they say, well, there's 700 players being laid off out of contract this summer. We're doing your lad a favour.
And our players, like, I don't like using terms like the old days. I'm going to have to in a moment with our last question. But in the old days, the idea was that a player would love a transfer because the player would be getting a 10% of the transfer fee as a signing on fee. Has that gone, that notion?
I think if they don't ask for a transfer, they are still entitled to a slice of the registration fee. And that's why you don't see players putting in written transfer requests. And there are, and again, at the upper end of football, the club players are incentivized to move by the buying club. And that can be for a variety of assets as well as cash.
Yeah. See, as you know, Kieran, I'm generally not naturally nostalgic. Not about life anyway, but certainly I do occasionally miss the days when the only way you knew you'd signed a player was that they brought a desk out at half time.
Yes,
and a bemused-looking blonde lad in a jacket 2 years behind the rest of the world would come out and sign a piece of paper. And you go, "Who's that? I don't know, but it must be from the north, judging by his jacket." Our final question, and mullet, yeah. Our final question. Don't tweet is a joke. Our final question takes us back to the old days, Kieran, and it's Mark Ridley takes us back to a terrible shithole of a ground. It really was. No disrespect, Reading fans. And I say that as somebody who watches football almost week in, week out at a terrible shithole of the ground. Mark Ridley says, back in the mid-70s, watching football at Reading's Elm Park, a terrace wag would shout out, "It's a club, not a corporation."
Now, younger listeners will think a wag is something else.
Yeah. Well, also it's the sort of expression you use. A terrace wag is like you use about somebody who shouts out, "It's a corporation, not a club," every week. But Mark's quite right, because there always was somebody who would shout, "Pull your finger out! I pay your wages." Which I once said to a prostate doctor. But anyway, But Mark Ridley said this, of course, was a time back in those days when gate money did contribute to a player's income. Could Kieran work out how much the cost of the average season ticket now contributes to a Premier League player's salary? Is that doable?
Well, yes, it's. I've written an article on this historically, so it comes as no great surprise.
Of course, you have.
In the Premier League, the average season ticket holder contributes 22 pence of every £1 that gets paid in wages.
Oh, that's more than I thought, actually.
Well, it does vary very, very, very much from club to club. So, if you take a look at Spurs and Arsenal, Spurs is 46%, so 46 pence in every pound of Harry Kane's wages is coming from the terraces. Arsenal's is 42. At the other end of the scale, going back to one club we've already mentioned, Burnley. Burnley fans only contribute 7 pence out of every pound's worth of wages that the players earn. And I looked at your club, Palace. Palace, it's 9. So because Palace have. They don't rip the fans off in terms of season ticket prices. We've had the discussion about the expansion of the ground. Well, at present, you don't have a huge prawn sandwich brigade subsidising and contributing towards match day and so on. So it does. It's a huge variation from club to club, but on average, it's around about just over a fifth. So you're paying the wages of 2 players at most clubs. At Palace, you're paying the wages of 1.
That's really interesting because of everything that you've taught me in this past 2 years, some of which has been about football finance, Kieran. I've learned that increasingly as each season goes by, gate money becomes less and less important. So I was half expecting you when you said 22 pence. I was half expecting that to be 22 pence a million, but that's much more than I thought. So match day income is still a significant contributor then. I mean, 22% is a fair old whack of a player's wages, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the total match day income in the Premier League in a normal season, we're probably talking around about 650 million quid. So, that covers the average wage bill for, our clubs are paying wage bills of just over 100 million. It does make a difference. Clubs have been hit through having to play matches behind closed doors, but it's far that 22% is far higher once you drop into the EFL because they don't have the benefit of the huge TV deal. The contribution made by fans in EFL clubs is much greater.
Well, speaking of contributions, Kieran, it's almost like you did that deliberately. If you would like to make a small contribution to our Always Free to Air podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/price of football. That would be very kind of you. If you have any questions for future questions pods, it's questions@priceoffootball.com, and I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire, who I know, even though it's now only 10:30, is itching to get to Brighton Arsenal at 5:30. I don't know why, Kieran. You can't drink that much water.
Well, yeah, but we've just announced our guest pies for the month.
Guest pies?
We have guest pies.
Guest pies?
Yeah. Yeah, with chicken and chorizo and a 5-inch vegan sausage roll.
Ah, jeez. Game's gone, isn't it?
Yes.
Guest pies. I would tell my dad that, but I don't want to ruin the last decade of his life. Basically, still chuntering about goalkeepers wearing gloves. Guest pie. Although he would, even though his mind's wandering a bit, if I was to say to him, "Yeah, Dad, guess what club has got a chicken and chorizo?" It's Brighton, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks again, folks, for all the feedback. If you want to support the show, variety of means. Kevin's mentioned Patreon. The other way that you can do that is by going on to the Apple Podcast app and giving us a 5-star review. It doesn't matter what you say. In fact, I tend to read them, and they're very entertaining stuff. So if you give us the 5 stars, and you can write as rude things as you want about myself, Kevin, or even Finlay, who's in a bit of a crisis today because as part of the supply chain issues, there is a shortage of wonky jobs.
Oh my Lord, goodness me, no.
Yeah.
It might have to be a chicken and chorizo pie for Phyllis.
It might indeed, yeah. Well, he won't be happy with a vegan sausage roll, would he?
No, of course he won't. I'm not even entirely sure that chorizo goes with chicken. It's overwhelm the chicken unless never mind. It will be some sort of local Sussex cured chorizo as well, wouldn't it? I imagine. And a chicken that lived in a hotel for all its life before being invited to take its own. Shocking guest pie. You've ruined the rest of my day now.
I'm sorry about
no,
that.
in fact, you've enhanced it, so I can't wait to tell people that. I was going to say it all. I'm going to say to Julian Chenry, you know that bloke you were fanboying all over? He's going to Brighton early to get a guest pie. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.